Hello friends. I can see 90% of my viewers don't subscribe while watching videos. Please hit the subscribe button and like this video. Press that bell icon for notifications. And tell me in the comments from which city you are watching this video. They say blood is thicker than water, but greed can poison even the strongest family bonds. When my brother stole my birthright, I thought my dreams were buried forever. I was wrong. My name is Kira, and this is the story of how betrayal became the fertilizer for my greatest triumph. The morning my father drew his final breath, I held his weathered hand in the sterile hospital room. His calloused fingers, those same hands that had taught me to feel the soil for moisture, to judge the ripeness of corn by its golden hue, went cold in mine. "Promise me," he had whispered weeks before his passing, his voice barely audible above the machines keeping him alive. "Promise me you and Nathaniel will work the land together. It is what your mother would have wanted." I had nodded, tears streaming down my face. Of course we would. The Blackwood farm had been in our family for 4 generations. Nathaniel and I had grown up between those furrows, our childhood soundtracked by the rumble of tractors and the whisper of wind through wheat. But grief, I learned, can reveal the darkest corners of a person's soul. 3 days after the funeral, while I was still wearing black, still accepting casseroles from neighbors who spoke in hushed tones about what a good man my father had been, Nathaniel called me into the farmhouse kitchen, the same kitchen where our mother had made Sunday pancakes, where we had done homework at the worn wooden table, where family meant everything. "Kira," he said, his voice strangely formal. He was holding a manila folder, thick with documents. "We need to talk about the farm." I wiped my eyes with a tissue, still raw from the morning's breakdown in the barn where I had found our father's favorite work gloves hanging on a nail. "Of course," I said. "I have been thinking, maybe we should modernize the irrigation system Dad always talked about." "There is no we," Nathaniel interrupted, his words hitting me like a physical blow. "The farm is mine now." The coffee mug in my hands suddenly felt impossibly heavy. "What do you mean?" He slid papers across the table, the sound sharp in the sudden silence. "Dad changed his will 6 months ago. He left everything to me." My world tilted. The familiar kitchen, with its cheerful yellow walls and the cross-stitch my grandmother had made, suddenly felt foreign, cold. "That cannot be right," I whispered, scanning the documents with shaking hands. "We were supposed to inherit together." "He promised." "Promises change," Nathaniel said, and the cruelty in his voice was like nothing I had ever heard from my gentle brother, the boy who used to help me catch fireflies, who had held me when I cried over my first heartbreak. Maybe he realized that farming is not women's work. Those words, those poisonous words, would echo in my mind for months to come. I stared at the signature at the bottom of the will. It looked like our father's handwriting, but something felt wrong. The loops were too tight, the pressure too heavy. But grief makes you doubt everything, even your own instincts. "This cannot be happening," I said, my voice breaking. "Nathaniel, we are family. And family takes care of family," he replied, his tone matter of fact. "I will let you stay in the old cottage for a few months, until you figure things out." The old cottage, the tiny 2-room building where our farmhands used to live. He was offering me charity, on my own land. I looked at my brother, really looked at him, and realized I was staring at a stranger. His eyes, once warm and laughing, were cold as winter soil. "Get out," I whispered. "Excuse me." "Get out," I screamed, sweeping the coffee mugs off the table. They shattered against the linoleum, sending shards across the floor like my broken heart. "Get out of my house." Nathaniel did not even flinch. He simply gathered his papers, straightened his tie, and walked toward the door. "You have until the end of the month to clear out your things," he said without turning around. "And Kira? Next time you throw a tantrum, remember who owns this place now." The door slammed behind him, leaving me alone in the wreckage of my family, my future, my entire world. I spent that night on the kitchen floor, surrounded by broken ceramic and shattered dreams, sobbing until I had no tears left. The next morning, I called a lawyer, then another, then another. Each consultation ended the same way. The will appeared legitimate. The signature looked authentic. Without concrete proof of forgery, there was nothing they could do. Sometimes, the last lawyer told me, her voice gentle but final, families make decisions that seem unfair. But legally speaking, your brother has every right to that property. I walked out of her office, into the scorching July heat, and felt completely hollow. For weeks, I drifted through my days like a ghost. I moved my belongings, 27 years of memories, into the cramped cottage that smelled of mildew and abandonment. From my tiny window, I could see the farmhouse where I had grown up, where Nathaniel now lived, alone, in rooms that echoed with our father's absence. The neighbors whispered. I heard them at the grocery store, in hushed voices that stopped when I walked by. Poor Kira, they would say. Should have seen it coming. Nathaniel was always the favorite. She was too trusting, too naive. This is what happens when you do not protect yourself. Such a shame. That farm needs a woman's touch. Their pity burned worse than Nathaniel's betrayal. One evening, as I sat on the cottage porch watching the sunset paint the wheat fields gold, something inside me shifted. I was done being a victim. I was done wallowing in what had been stolen from me. If Nathaniel wanted the farm, he could have it. But I would not disappear quietly into the background of his success story. I had $5,000 in my savings account, a 2015 Honda Civic with 150,000 miles, and a small plot of land, just 3 acres, that my grandmother had left me years ago. It sat adjacent to the farm, separated only by a chain-link fence. It was not much, but it was mine. That night, I researched until my eyes burned and my laptop battery died twice. I read about soil composition, about grape varieties that thrived in our climate, about small-scale winemaking techniques that turned grapes into liquid gold. By dawn, I had a plan. The next morning, I drove to the county extension office and spoke with Marcus Chen, the agricultural specialist who had helped my father troubleshoot crop rotation issues for years. Wine grapes? He asked, raising an eyebrow as he looked over my grandmother's property survey. Kira, that is a huge risk. Do you have any experience with viticulture? No, I admitted, but I have experience with loss, and I am not afraid of hard work. Marcus studied my face for a long moment. Then he smiled, the first genuine smile I had seen in weeks. Well then, he said, pulling out a thick manual about grape cultivation. Let us get started. The first year was brutal. I planted my vines in early spring, 3,000 Cabernet Sauvignon plants arranged in neat rows across my small plot. Each morning before dawn, I would walk the rows, checking for pests, adjusting irrigation lines, talking to the plants like they were my children, because in many ways, they were. From across the fence, I could see Nathaniel watching me sometimes. He would stand at the edge of his cornfield, arms crossed, a smirk on his face like he was watching a child play dress-up. Let him watch, I thought. Let him see what determination looks like. The first harvest was disappointing. The grapes were adequate, nothing special. I crushed them myself in a borrowed press, fermented the juice in plastic containers in my cottage, and ended up with 12 bottles of wine that tasted like disappointment. But I did not quit. The second year was better. I had learned to read the vines, to understand their needs. I invested in proper fermentation equipment, taking out a small business loan that made my palms sweat when I signed the papers. I produced 60 bottles that year. Still amateur, but improving. By the third year, word had gotten around town about the crazy woman making wine next to the Blackwood farm. Some people came by out of curiosity, others out of pity, but they came. And slowly, bottle by bottle, they kept coming back. I named my winery Rowan Hills, after my grandmother's maiden name, and the rolling landscape that had shaped my childhood. Every bottle label told a story, not just of the wine inside, but of resilience, of starting over, of refusing to be broken by betrayal. The breakthrough came in year 4. I had been experimenting with oak aging, buying used barrels from a larger winery 3 counties over. The 2019 Cabernet had developed something special, a complexity that made even my harshest critics pause. when food writer Isabella Martinez visited as part of a regional wine tour. I was nervous. She had made and broken reputations with her reviews in Wine and Country magazine. I poured her a glass on my small tasting deck, a simple wooden platform I had built myself overlooking the vineyard. She sipped, paused, sipped again. Then she asked for the story behind the wine. I told her everything. About my father's death, Nathaniel's betrayal, the stolen farm, the decision to start over with nothing but hope and 3 acres of possibility. When I finished, tears were streaming down her face. "This wine," she said softly, "tastes like triumph." Her review ran with the headline, "Rowan Hills, where heartbreak becomes art." The article changed everything. Orders started pouring in from across the state, then across the country. I hired my first employee, then my second, then my third. I expanded the tasting room, adding rustic tables and string lights that made evening gatherings feel magical. I partnered with local restaurants, hosting wine dinners that showcased both my bottles and regional cuisine. The property that Nathaniel had dismissed as too small, too worthless, became a destination. Meanwhile, across the fence, the farm was struggling. I did not take pleasure in Nathaniel's difficulties, not at first. But I could not help but notice the signs. Equipment sitting broken in the yard. Fields that should have been planted sitting fallow. The farmhouse falling into disrepair. Paint peeling from the shutters that our mother had painted bright blue. The farm that had supported our family for generations was dying under his neglect. I heard through town gossip that he had taken out loan after loan, gambling on crop futures that never paid off. That he had fired the longtime farmhands who knew the land better than anyone. That he spent more time at the casino 2 towns over than in the fields that needed his attention. By year 6, my winery was featured in food and wine magazines, Hidden Gems of American Wine Country. We were shipping bottles to restaurants in New York, California, even internationally. The tasting room was booked solid through the summer months. Couples came for romantic weekend getaways. Wine clubs organized tours. I had to hire a full-time event coordinator just to manage the weddings and corporate retreats. The little cottage where I had cried myself to sleep, where I had felt so small and powerless, became my office. I kept it simple, just a desk and some filing cabinets, as a reminder of how far I had come. And the view from that office window? It looked directly at the farmhouse where my brother lived alone, surrounded by the ghosts of his choices. One evening in late September, during harvest season, I was working late in the vineyard when I saw a familiar figure approaching through the grape rows. Nathaniel looked older than his 35 years. His face was weathered, not from honest work in the sun, but from stress and sleepless nights. His clothes, once immaculate, were wrinkled and stained. "Kira," he said, stopping a few feet away. His voice was different, smaller. The arrogance that had defined him for so long was gone. "Nathaniel," I replied, continuing to check the sugar content of my grapes. I did not look at him. Could not look at him. "The farm is..." He started, then stopped. Cleared his throat. "Things have been difficult." I said nothing. I was wondering. He continued, the words seeming to stick in his throat. "Maybe we could work together. Combine our operations. You clearly have a talent for this, for business." Now I did look at him, really looked at him, and saw a man who had traded his soul for property he could not manage, respect he had not earned, power that had corrupted him completely. "Work together?" I repeated, setting down my refractometer. "Like family?" He nodded eagerly, hope flickering in his eyes. I walked to my tasting room, Nathaniel following behind like a desperate puppy. I selected a bottle from my reserve collection, my finest Cabernet, aged 5 years in French oak. I poured 2 glasses, the wine catching the last light of sunset like liquid rubies. "This wine," I said, handing him a glass, "is from my 2019 harvest. The year Isabella Martinez discovered us. The year everything changed." Nathaniel sipped, and I saw his eyes widen slightly. Even he, with all his faults, could recognize quality. "It is exceptional," he admitted quietly. "This particular bottle is from a limited release. I continued, savoring the moment. Only 50 bottles made. I call this blend second chances. Hope bloomed across his face. But you know what the beautiful thing about second chances is, Nathaniel? I asked, my voice steady as stone. He shook his head, hanging on my every word. They have to be earned. I took the glass from his hands, poured the wine onto the ground between us, watching it soak into the soil that had witnessed our family's rise and fall. This land, I said, gesturing toward my vineyard, my tasting room, the life I had built from nothing, was supposed to be worthless, too small to matter. But you know what I learned? Nathaniel stood frozen, wine still dripping from his fingers. Sometimes the smallest seed grows the strongest roots. I turned away from him, toward my vineyard, my triumph, my proof that betrayal does not have to be the end of the story. Kira, please. He called after me. I am sorry. I am so sorry. I paused at the edge of my tasting deck, looking out over rows of vines heavy with fruit, ready for harvest. Sorry does not give me back the father who trusted you, I said without turning around. Sorry does not return the farm that should have been ours to share. Sorry does not erase the nights I cried myself to sleep, wondering if I was strong enough to start over. I heard his footsteps, shuffling away through the gravel. But thank you, Nathaniel, I called out, finally turning to face him one last time. Thank you for teaching me that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find out who you really are. He stopped at the edge of my property, shoulders slumped in defeat. The farm is going into foreclosure next month, he said, his voice barely audible. I felt nothing. No satisfaction. No pity. Just the quiet certainty that justice, real justice, is not about revenge. It is about building something so beautiful, so successful, so undeniably yours, that the past cannot touch it. I know, I said simply. After he left, I sat on my tasting deck as the stars emerged overhead. Tomorrow would bring another day of harvest, of crushing grapes that would become wine that would travel the world, carrying with them the story of a woman who refused to be defeated. In the distance, I could see the lights of the farmhouse, soon to belong to the bank, then to new owners who would love it the way it deserved to be loved. And here, on my 3 acres of possibility, I would continue growing something that could not be stolen, could not be manipulated, could not be diminished by anyone's greed or betrayal. I would grow my future, one grape at a time. The next morning brought the harvest crew, 20 seasonal workers who had become like family over the years. As we picked the last of the Cabernet grapes, the sun painting everything golden, I thought about my father. He had wanted Nathaniel and me to work the land together. In a way, we had. His betrayal had driven me to create something he never could have imagined. Something uniquely mine. Something that honored our family's agricultural legacy while writing an entirely new chapter. Sometimes, the most beautiful gardens grow in the ashes of what we thought we had lost forever. As I write this, 10 years after that devastating morning in the kitchen, Rowan Hills ships wine to all 50 states and 12 countries. We employ 32 people full-time. Food Network featured us in their America's Most Inspiring Wineries special. And every evening, as I sit on my tasting deck watching the sunset paint my vineyard gold, I am grateful. Grateful for the betrayal that forced me to discover my strength. Grateful for the loss that taught me what truly cannot be taken away. Grateful for the brother who, in stealing my past, gave me the motivation to create an extraordinary future. They say blood is thicker than water, but I learned that determination, resilience, and the willingness to start over with nothing but hope, those things are thicker than blood, and they taste infinitely sweeter than revenge. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories of triumph over betrayal. Hit that notification bell and join our community of survivors who refuse to let others write their ending. Your story of strength could inspire someone who needs to hear it today.